I don't care if it's £4 million, it's for charity, just transfer the money. Honestly, some people, they just don't get it, do they? Oh, hi there. Sorry, didn't see you. One sec. Checkmate. So, I know you're thinking about what would be a really cheap, really decent Christmas present for either yourself or friends and family, and I have to say that my book, In Two Minds, is upside down, is going to be a perfect gift, and it's going to be 99 pence on Amazon Kindle from the 26th of December to the 6th of January, or you can buy the physical book. Bit awkward to put in a stocking, but that's your problem. So in this video, I'm going to tell you 5 reasons why you should buy my book and 2 reasons why you shouldn't. Reason number 1 of why you should buy my book is I outline my experience of working as a forensic psychiatry, assessing and rehabilitating mentally disordered offenders, and there are dozens of cases. So I talk about a tragic case of an 18-year-old girl who became psychotic, killed her own nephew. I talk about a guy with learning disabilities who was catfished by a vigilante paedophile hunting group. I kid you not. I talk about a female fraudster who I think faked mental illness to try and get away with some fraud that she committed. More on that later. Number 2 reason why I think you should buy this book is it tells you a lot about what happens behind the scenes of treating people who are criminals but have severe mental illnesses, such as my experiences working in a prison, such as seeing somebody with horrific deliberate self-harm, cutting herself to the point that there was literally blood spurting all over the cell. If you want to know how that story ended, it's pretty messy. It's in my book. And just how it all works, the mechanisms behind assessing somebody to give evidence in court as an expert witness. Number 3, the third reason why I think you should get my book on Amazon Kindle is that there are good reviews. So there are about 330 odd reviews on Amazon. You can check them out. And I got 4.7 stars overall out of 5. There were some haters, but that's fine. Doesn't bother me. It doesn't upset me at all. Number 4 reason why I think you should buy my book is that it is funny, I'd like to think. You might dispute that, but have a look at the reviews. And also it's written in layman's terms, so I'm taking complicated kind of jargonistic issues and boiling them down to simple elements so that anybody can understand them. And the 5th and final reason, and let's face it, it's a pretty good reason, is value for money. It is 99 pence. 99 pence. It took me like 18 months to write the goddamn thing, and you're getting it for 99 pence. That is a veritable bargain. Okay, 2 reasons why I don't think you should buy my book. I don't need the attention, do I? Really? I should probably just pipe down. Clearly I didn't get enough hugs as a kid, and by buying it you're feeding into my narcissism, so please don't buy it. And number 2 reason is it's 99 pence. There's so many other things that you can buy for 99p. Like bubblegum, a newspaper. I've not bought a newspaper for years. I imagine they're probably less than £1. Anyway, to whet your appetite, I'm now going to show you a clip of me reading out about a case from my book. It was the aforementioned female fraudster and how I think she got away with lying about mental illness. So enjoy, buy my book, have a Merry Christmas, and do not forget, I love you. Ms. Darina Boyko. She was a recently divorced woman in her mid-30s. She was from the Ukraine. She used to be a model. And she was facing multiple charges related to a convoluted £1 million swindle. She'd apparently intentionally missold carbon credits and was in cahoots with her cousin and her ex-boss who she had an affair with for several years. That's relevant to later on. So it was a sophisticated fraud. I won't go into all the details, but it involved forging documents, making bank accounts, attending meetings. So it's not something that was, done once impulsively. It was cold and calculated. And she received more than £2.5 million in corrupt payments over 6 years, siphoned some of that off to her codependent. So this was an independent fitness to plead assessment, and I was asked to do this on behalf of the Crown Prosecution Service because there'd already been one done by the defence, and they basically smelt the rat. They didn't believe they didn't believe what the defence report was saying. So as I outlined in my book, it's actually quite rare for a forensic psychiatrist such as myself to see fraud cases because to be blunt, when you're having symptoms of mental illness, such as hearing voices telling you deserve to die, or you've got paranoid delusions about the CIA trying to follow you or kill you, you're more likely to strike out aggressively or violently and impulsively rather than commit this complicated fraud. Skullduggery requires clarity of thought, is what I said to sound clever in my book. Okay, so according to the first court report, Darina was privately educated, culturally motivated, forced into piano, ballet, Latin. Her parents were overbearing and critical. So she might have had a challenging upbringing, but I think it's fair to say much less harsh than the vast majority of my patients who come from backgrounds of, abuse, violence, etc., etc. So she had obtained an economics degree at a prestigious university. She previously had a six-figure salaried, high-pressure job in trading. She'd married a multimillionaire CEO, 20 years older, although they're kind of separated by the time this court case came round. Quick quote from my book: "They lived in Mayfair, a very exclusive area of London, home to the odd billionaire oligarch and A-list celebrity, its ostentatiousness reflected by its extortionate price on the Monopoly board." Monopoly players out there, you know what I'm talking about. Then I talked a little bit about how her cousin had been caught in this scam and the financial breadcrumbs led back to Darina, which is why she was being tried. She actually had been tried the year before I met her, but the criminal trial was stopped because of her 5-year-old son developing a rare form of leukemia. Again, that is relevant. But when I saw her, she'd been retried, but both of the co-defendants were already found guilty and they were already incarcerated. So let's get to Darina's current trial. So she flat out refused to engage in the court process. She ignored letters from her own solicitors. When they did speak to her, she was crying, full of tears. She claimed that she had depression due to the situation with her son and also a breakdown of her marriage. According to her medical notes, her GP didn't seem, I didn't think, particularly that concerned about health. So for example, her GP didn't refer her on to community mental health services. She did see a private psychiatrist who'd written a remarkably brief letter confirming the diagnoses that she had proposed. And I wrote in my book, if I was cynical, which I am, I might suspect that some people pay private psychiatrists to write spurious letters for their personal gain, which they do. And I think that some even use them for dodgy evidence, which is what I think Darina was trying to do. And for reasons that I go into my book, I just didn't think this letter was particularly well structured. So there was all these claims of diagnoses, but there wasn't like a description of the relevant symptomatology. So it was spurious, to be polite. Similarly, Darina's previous fitness to plead assessment was undertaken by a very senior, very experienced forensic psychiatrist on behalf of the defense. His name was on the spine of the many textbooks I had read or purchased with the genuine intent to read eventually. I still do intend to read them someday. So the Crown Prosecution Service found that his conclusions were dubious, and that's why they instructed me for a second opinion. And I have to say that in my opinion, and as I said in the book, it's just my opinion, I think she duped this first doctor, this first forensic psychiatrist. I think her dramatic, tearful presentation clouded his judgment. So when I assessed Darina, she presented as a very smartly dressed woman, pristine suit, designer handbag, snooty comments. She was very striking, she was very pretty. She was extremely tearful throughout the interview. She cried heavily, often for minutes at a time. She was also quite passive aggressive. So I'll give you an example, as I said in my book. After I introduced myself, I asked, as is standard, do you understand why the court has asked me to assess you? Those bastards want to separate me from my children and you want to help them, she replied, dabbing at her eyes. So basically I felt that she was being deliberately obstructive. I think she was very touchy, she was very guarded. She was very evasive when speaking about her alleged offences. So she'd give me replies like, how many times must I tell you? I never keep track of my incomings and outgoings. It was pocket change for me. But, and here's the important bit, she was able to discuss other topics such as her childhood and a previous employment in detail without the waterworks. And I just felt that there were certain other elements of her case that didn't add up. So she claimed to have this debilitating depression, but her GP didn't feel the need to escalate her care, as I said. She had some recommendations from this private psychiatrist, such as seeing a psychotherapist, but she hadn't followed through. And another big red flag for me was Darina's level of functioning. So she was able to take her children out to the park on a daily basis. She drove to medical appointments. She attended the odd spin class. She went for a run. She would cook most days. And although we were both encumbered with small children, I did not have a nanny like she did, and I felt her lifestyle sounded more exciting and fulfilling than mine. So this all occurred a few years ago when my kids were young, and yeah, what I said in my book is accurate. I remember thinking that her lifestyle and her functioning was just better than mine. She was able to do more than I could with two kids. The reason I think that's relevant is because that doesn't really reflect somebody who's suffering from a debilitating mental illness. As a forensic psychiatrist, I always look at their level of functioning. To me, it's one of the biggest keys about severity of illness. Some of my colleagues do this, as they should. I've seen some poor psychiatry reports where they only focus on the reported symptomatology. They don't look at the level of functioning. It's a key thing that, in my view, cannot be missed if you're a half-decent psychiatrist. So after some verbal jabbing and weaving and Darina crying profusely, she realized that I wouldn't allow her to just sidestep discussion about the fraud allegations like the other psychiatrist did. And I also noted that other cracks started appearing. So for example, she was apparently incapable of remembering the very basic elements of the case. She forgot the name of the co-defendant, who she'd been in an intimate relationship with for over a year and had worked for more than 3 years. So to me, this just didn't ring true. Even if you were severely depressed, you would be able to answer those basic questions. And another issue was that even after I prompted her, she was unable to tell me if any family members, i.e. her cousin, were involved in the case. Again, I was smelling BS. It didn't seem feasible to me that she couldn't answer those questions. So my conclusion was that Darina's profuse crying, dodging questions, ignoring letters from her solicitors, not talking to her solicitors properly, declining psychiatric treatment, her selective memory loss, all of this were deliberate attempts to evade her trial. So I said that Darina was capable of the Pritchard criteria, which is what defines fitness to plead, but was intentionally choosing not to cooperate. That's what I said in my court report. That's what I said on the witness stand at the Old Bailey. And during cross-examination, the defense barrister, so her barrister's main argument was that my assessment was limited because I hadn't properly elicited all the information from the specific Pritchard criteria, which is true, but I couldn't because Darina would not cooperate. So we went into this sort of circular argument where he kept making the same point and kept trying to sort of say that my assessment wasn't of the standard needed for such an important trial. And I kept saying, well, this is the best I can do and she's not cooperating. I expect the judge to intervene, but he did not. What I wrote in my book is to engage into some retrospective damage control of my personal image. To be clear, I am a father and I do have a heart. Those two things are still true, even if my heart is somewhat calloused by years of analysing horrific acts of violence. And I fully appreciated that Darina was going through a traumatic period with the illness of her son. She probably did have a degree of depression and anxiety. And I accept that there might have been humanitarian reasons that the court might not wish to put Darina through a criminal trial. In fact, I specifically wrote that in my court report. I said, if the judge wished to drop the charge on compassionate grounds, I was fine with that. I had no qualms with that. What I objected to was her using mental illness as a smokescreen. So in the end, the judge actually ignored my opinion. So the judge thought that Darina was unfit to plead. And as I wrote in my book, I was and still am fairly certain that this was the incorrect call. But I also knew that my place was as an advisor only. The judge has the ultimate say. Personally, I thought that the image of the courts dragging in a grieving mother with a sick child who was previously dying was just unpalatable. And I also think that having the main two perpetrators behind bars was a concession of sorts. So compassion overruling justice in this particular case was not unreasonable in my view, but it should have been a legal decision, not a clinical one. Otherwise, the system itself is also at risk of using mental illness as a smokescreen. Dun, dun, dun. damning words in what can only be described as a cutting-edge book. I'm sure you'll agree. So in my book, I'm not going to mention them now, but in my book, I talked about other cases that this reminded me of. So one of Anna Sorokin, who committed fraud around the same time as Darina. She's Russian-born German, moved to New York City. She conned a bank out of around $100,000, and she had access to 60 million euros. So she committed a very high level of fraud. Also had some similar personality traits. She was very entitled, had lack of empathy, etc., etc.